So Bill, we've got you now. You've been hired in the criminal law part of AT&T. They convinced you financially and otherwise that that would be a good move for you. And under that jurisdiction is really the relationships you have with the Justice Department and the executive.
Yes.
And is that the time where you got to learn a little bit about Robert Jackson and his role in wiretapping?
I may have known about it before when he was Attorney General, and Roosevelt asked him whether he had the legal right to authorize wiretapping in national security investigations. That was a very interesting spell. And that was in September of 1965. And I was transferred. And I was in the office about half a day when requests came in. Howard said there's some new type of electronic fraud device. And we had one of the devices in a Camel, I think it was Camel, cigarette pack. Then the user of the device would press it for a 2600 cycle, seizing the line, which to the system looked like the call going to information.
Right.
And there was no record of where else it would be, but the line was seized by this 2600 cycle tone. Then you could dial anywheres. It became a matter of interest to the mafia.
Right.
Particularly for horse racing, because they could seize the line, and send the flash that would get to the betting places before anyone else could get there by ordinary telephone.
Here's the term wiretap. What's the mechanism?
Well, the mechanism in those days was quite different. It was before digitalization. Take a central point near where there was suspected criminal activity, and they would lease a line from a listing post that would have, the line was provided by the telephone company.
That was your private line.
Yeah. Then they would physically attach the leased line to the line running from a suspected point to the listening post. And then they had the capabilities of recording by use of a pen register, they called them, the numbers dialed. We would not engage in doing the wiretapping ourselves. We would merely supply the facilities, leased lines. This disappointed many U.S. attorneys who had been a little too close to security intelligence managers of the various Bell System companies, and were used to getting, before federal wiretapping was statutorily protected.
Right.
Central Telephone Company had a small but critical role, refused to provide any assistance whatever without a court order. We were asked to try and work out something when the wiretapping would be for national security purposes rather than criminal purposes.
Were there FBI letters to your system?
And worked out with our Washington office and myself the so-called national security letter. Authorization to do this without court order if the Attorney General said he was acting in behalf of the President in defending against all enemies.
So there actually would be a letter from the Attorney General or his designee and the FBI to Bell.
Yes, we had worked on the letter with them and agreed to accept it.
Because it wouldn't identify the risk, who the risk is, would it?
No. What they would do, wiretapping, assistance. We had to be very careful that this would not be used by law enforcement, not only federal but state.
Right.
And it led to us for national security purposes.
1968 was an interesting time in our country, gathering information about Martin Luther King.
Yes, and others. I know we had problems with Robert Kennedy.
And Robert Kennedy, yes.
Recognized that the publicity would be monumental and all bad.
I realize you get protection because they didn't tell you who specifically was the target, and therefore you relied on it, actual reliance, but do you feel like you were being used?
We were very careful not to ask.
Right. Fundamentally, Bill, you were involved in the interpretation of the legacy of Attorney General Jackson's advice given in the 1940s to President Roosevelt.
Robert Jackson's group had blessed the activity in 1941. We were drafted with the intelligence agencies the national security letter insistent upon that we would give no assistance, even under court order, except in the limited circumstances which did not involve our having to do any of the wiretapping. Kudos to Mr. Justice Jackson for his sagacious legal position on wiretapping.
Okay. Who would have guessed, Bill Kaming, that your life would intersect with Robert Jackson on many occasions? First, the legacy of the Nuremberg trial and your case in the subsequent trials, and then now also through your days at Bell in the counsel's office, wiretapping, relying on Jackson. And here we are in 2013 continuing to talk about Robert Jackson and the Jackson Center. My gosh, it just keeps coming up.
Yes.
Bill, you're the luckiest man in the world. So much talent there, Bill.